I'm Wendy. Today we're painting in watercolour again, and we're painting trees and daisies. It's a tutorial. This is my photograph that inspired the painting that I'm going to be doing. I just love the contrast between the daisies with those lovely orange centres contrasting against these foreground trees which were very dark. And then you've got some distance in your picture. You've got those distant trees which I did change the colour of. They're looking quite green there, but I made them more of a purpley colour. I'm working on Saunders Waterford paper here, £140 knot. I did a couple of paintings prior to doing this one, and I worked out a composition of about 7 inches by 6 inches that I quite liked. So in this instance I did tape around it because, as I said, I'd done some practicing and sort of knew the composition that I wanted. I did a rough sketch. I don't do very detailed sketches because I tend to work out the picture and make adjustments as I go along. But in this case, I did this composition. As I said, I'd sort of practiced that a little bit, and I liked just the one tree, although I did think about putting the one in on the right. I'm applying masking fluid for the daisies. I won't go into a detail on how to use this. I'll put some links in the description box. If you follow my channel, you'll know that I use it quite frequently. If you don't like masking fluid, then you could always put these daisies on at the end with white gouache or a body colour. In actual fact, I quite often do adjust the shapes that are made with the masking fluid, because they can be a little bit unpredictable sometimes. Switching brushes here, I'm just doing some grasses with a very fine rigger. I started the painting with the sky as usual, and in this case I wanted to keep it really pale, and I used Prussian blue, which I think makes a nice cool blue background for the painting. I didn't keep it too neat. I'm quite a loose painter, so I find making some sort of random marks makes the picture more interesting. This foreground colour was very, very difficult, and I ended up using raw sienna, a bit of burnt umber, and I put a little bit of white gouache with it just to sort of knock it back and give it that sort of opaque feeling that I sort of got from these foregrounds. And then I had a little bit of sap green in the foreground. I wanted to keep the foreground very, very loose. I didn't want this painting to get too busy. I wanted some areas that could breathe with some space in there. I do tend to get a bit too fussy and overwork things. For the far distant trees, I used ultramarine mixed with some light red. I'm trying to keep it on the blue side rather than getting it too red. I worked wet into wet, a little bit of dry brush in places, and you'll see I mixed up some slightly darker colours for the base of the trees. I wanted to make sure that I carried on the colour to the left side of the tree as well, because I thought that would be quite nice. These colours are going to these purpley colours. I find are really nice against the greens. I didn't want a hard line at the base of the trees, so I used some sap green mixed with a bit of cobalt to just give a cool blue at the back there. And I put a slightly darker mix in the foreground area. The trees I'm working very loosely. I'm using a combination of dry brush work, and you can see I'm using the side of the brush with it's a watery mix, but it's fairly stiff. So I'm using a mixture of this dry brush work and some wet into wet work, and you'll see a little bit later on that I then switched to a different brush to pick out a few of the leaves rather than just leaving these big shapes that I'm doing here. I'm using a different palette for my greens this time. I tend to use either ultramarine or Prussian blue for the greens, and this time I'm doing a lot of thinking here, aren't I? This time I'm using indigo. I like indigo. It's a lovely colour. I find sometimes the greens can be too cold. but I really enjoyed using it for this painting. So I'm using indigo as the blue, and the yellows I'm putting with that. It was quite nice with New Gamboge for a warmer colour. You can use a lighter yellow as well. It's just practicing. So if you fancy having a go with the indigo and you've not used it, do a few colour swatches and work out what you like. I think indigo with a cool light yellow for the lighter greens, and then putting in more of the warmer yellow to make the darker greens. And to make the really darks, I think I added just more indigo, and maybe you could always pop a little bit of red in there, like a burnt sienna. But as I said, you have to experiment and play around and see what you like with it. But as I said, I quite enjoyed using it for this picture. I was keeping an eye on my reference all the time when I was doing this. It was really important to keep the space here to be able to see the background through the foliage, and that's what I was thinking about, because it's all too easy to just get carried away with these brush strokes and to cover too much of the paper. So I was really concentrating and trying to be really careful to leave the background through the foliage. I was looking at the tones also. The darks on the left hand side here where I'm painting were quite dark behind the daisies on the left there, so I was also thinking about that. Such a lot to think about when you're painting, isn't it? And this is where I've switched to a different brush, because I like to just suggest and break up these big shapes with some little dots and dashes and little marks that stand for the leaves, little individual leaves on the outside of the tree. It's just the way I like to work, and so that's what I'm doing here. I accidentally picked up a little bit of burnt sienna or something here, but I left it because I thought, oh, it's quite nice to have a bit of variety in there, a bit of warmth in the foliage, and I think I dotted it about in one or two other places as well. So then I started on the tree trunk itself. You'll have noticed that I put the foliage on before I do the tree. I do tend to do that most of the time, because then you can sort of leave some of the green showing so that it looks as if it's over the trunk. It's not as prescriptive as doing the trunk and all the branches and everything beforehand, so that's the way I like to work. And I do like to do a little bit of wet into wet work as well with the trunks. I don't like it looking too flat. I like to get a little bit of texture in it, and you can do that by working wet into wet. The brown I'm using is burnt umber with some Payne's grey, which again is a bit of a new colour for me. I tend to stick with ultramarine and burnt umber or burnt sienna, but I'm liking using some Payne's grey with burnt umber, and you can put a bit of red in that to warm it up. I'm trying to be really, really loose with these branches and little twigs, trying to use the rigger, using it loosely, dotting around a little bit, letting yourself go a little bit rather than being too precise. I'm lifting out a bit of the colour here because I thought it was looking a little bit too flat. Lifting it out, giving it with a bit of water, this gives you some texture in there, which is something that I like to see. tree trunks do have texture, don't they? They vary a lot in the marks on there. And again, just putting a few extra twigs and things in there without overworking, hopefully. Putting some of the branches and twigs in there with a very light colour can give the impression of them being further back and giving a bit more depth to the tree. I should do that more often. I think it works quite nicely. I mixed a bit of green with the purple just to add a few more strokes in front of this area, again to suggest depth, so we've got some bushes in front of the distant trees. And again, using a rigger, just putting a few more of the twigs, something coming in from the side. I decided not to put the tree in on the right hand side, the bigger branches and trunks. And going back to the foreground, so as I said earlier, I didn't want to overwork this, so I was just dotting around, putting a few strokes in there to suggest a few leaves in the foreground. This is what I meant by not planning too much and just working with the picture, standing back, having a look at it, seeing where you think you need to put some detail. I like to use a small round pointy brush. This is a quill brush. If you like this quill brush, there is I put a link in the description box below. I find it really useful. It gives you some nice little shapes and it's a lovely little brush to use. And with a rigger, I was putting in just a few strokes to stand for a few of the grasses in the foreground. I'm removing the masking fluid with a special rubber called Mask Away. It's really good. I bought it years ago and it just lasts and lasts and lasts, and it's really good for taking the masking fluid off. I can highly recommend it, and I popped you a link in the description box. And now it's the easy bit, it's painting the middles of the daisies. I put yellow on first, cadmium or new gamboge, a nice warm yellow. And I like to mix colours, so I like, instead of just putting orange on, which there were, I like to put a yellow on and then drop the orange in. It just makes it a bit more subtle and a bit more painterly. And as you're doing this, you can then judge how strong you want the orange to be. You might want it a little bit stronger in places. Again, it's just standing back from your picture and deciding, making your own decisions on how it fits in with the rest of your picture. It was a loose painting and I didn't want to get too detailed and pernickety at the end, but I did use a little bit of white gouache just to tidy up one or two of the shapes on the daisies. Fortunately, I found that they weren't too bad. Sometimes you get little bits of the green showing through because the masking fluid didn't cover it properly, but I don't know, I think it adds a bit of character to the picture, and as I said, I didn't want to get too fussy with it. So I could have left the picture like this. Some of the daisies looked as if they were floating a bit too much, so I put one or two lighter stems on there. This was the finished painting. At the end, I put a tiny little bit of purple on some of the daisies. I'm not sure it was really necessary, but I thought just a tiny bit of purple as shadow and to tie in with the background. It's hardly noticeable. And maybe just one or two strokes with the rigger of some green grasses. And that was it, and I was quite pleased with it. It's quite a spontaneous painting. I know I'd done some practices, but I managed to keep this one quite spontaneous as well, which is what I was pleased about. I hope you like it. I hope you picked up some ideas for your own paintings from it. And if you want to use the reference to work out your own composition and your own painting, then do so. And remember, I've got a Facebook group so that you can always post your paintings on there. I always look at them and reply. So do that. There's a link to my Facebook group in the description box. I shall be painting more summery scenes soon, so if you don't want to miss what I'm doing next, then do subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up and all the rest of things like that, and I will be back fairly shortly with some more painting. Bye for now, and happy painting.